Joanne Moore. It's so nice to have you today with me. I'm so glad that you can be here. And today we're going to talk with Joanne Moore, who I consider to be a wonderful friend. She's a mother, a grandmother, a sister, an aunt, a quilter, a mask maker, an entrepreneur, an author, a physical therapist. You had your own practice that you just retired from. And you have a labyrinth at McCook Park. If we have time, maybe let's talk about that. You're a world traveler, a bicyclist, a kayaker. Joanne, what don't you do?
Well, I'm also very thankful to be on this show. Thank you very much for inviting me. This is a lot of fun.
Thank you so much. And now your latest passion is to be on the League of Women Voters of Connecticut.
Right.
And I had the opportunity to hear you speak last night, and I have to tell you, you were eloquent, and I can tell how passionate you are about the League of Women Voters. And one thing that really struck me with your speech last night is that you talked about basic human desires. You listed autonomy, independence, and justice.
Right. You know, we've both worked with small children in our work. You as a speech pathologist and me as a physical therapist. And across all genders, all races, all faith backgrounds, and without any influence of peer pressure, the most natural thing in the world for a child to say is no.
Okay.
It's not fair, and
Right.
I'll do it myself. And it's just a basic human drive that we have to be independent. And I pulled that into the talk last night about women's rights and how natural it is for us to want to be fully recognized by the government with all the rights and responsibilities of citizenship.
Well, to be honest with you, I wasn't quite sure of the difference between autonomy and independence. So I looked up the word autonomy today and found out that it could be self-respect, self-regulation, and self-government. And then it can be behavioral, emotional, or cognitive. So when you talk about autonomy, it is so much more really than just saying no. It's
Right.
asking for specific rights in very definite areas, whether self-respect, I want more, I don't want more, I want to stop, please help me to go more, and then government.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a basis of our government that we're supposed to be governed with the consent of the governed. And you can't have the consent of the governed without equal access to government by citizens, all citizens.
Which is complicated. So let's back up a little bit, because when we look at the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights, it didn't serve women, Native Americans, or people of color. And those are kind of protected classes to some extent, would you say?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Now they are.
Now they are, but
Yeah.
then 1776, that was not the case.
That was not the case, and it was intentional.
Right.
Abigail Adams, as her husband walked out the door to go to the Continental Congress, her last words to him were, "Remember the ladies." And when he came home, he had to report to her that he was not able to include the women in the Constitution, that in order to get more important things done, they had to compromise and leave the women out.
And what was more important than taking care of the ladies? Do you know what happened? Why was that so important for him to move on and to say the ladies don't matter? Was it just male pride, feeling like they can take care of the ladies?
I don't think so. I think they had to work with rural versus more industrialized areas, smaller states versus larger states. They had to decide how many Congress people to get from each state, how many senators should each one have. There were freedom of religion, freedom of speech. These were basic human rights that were being discussed. What they did was good and important. It just didn't go far enough.
Right, of course, and that's why we're still working on it today. But what I think is really important is that when you gave us your speech last night, you told us that Abigail Adams told her husband, remember the ladies, remember the women. But what did she do while he was gone?
She managed the farm, and they had 4 or 5 children, and she homeschooled them. They sat at a big table, and she was educated enough that she was able to educate the children. So
So she taught,
Yes.
she farmed, she managed the money. I mean, he was gone for months at a time.
That's
and
right.
farming is rigorous work and requires a lot of management of all kinds of different things, equipment.
right.
Right. So,
Yeah, farmers have to be veterinarians, mechanics, soil scientists, weather scientists.
and just creative thinkers, because something breaks down, you have to figure out how am I going to jerry-rig this to work together.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So the power of the human spirit and was the original intention of the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights, to protect the power of the human spirit and the power of the individual rights. And also, which I think is a really important point, is to protect society from the abuse of individual power.
Correct. They
Yeah.
didn't want another King George. They wanted that peaceful transition of power every time there was an election. So there's a lot in the Constitution about elections and transition of power and balance of power among the three branches of government. That was very important too.
Well, they had lived through some really difficult times and knew what could happen if we had somebody who didn't listen to its other bodies of government.
That's right.
And so this was to protect it.
Mm-hmm.
But then the Declaration of Sentiments came along in 1848, Seneca Falls, New
did.
York. Tell me about
did.
that.
That was, if you think about it, 80 years after the Constitution was written. So 4 generations of women carried on after the Constitution, and they finally were fed up. They were fed up because women had a very lowly status in society. This was more than just a desire to vote. It was a desire for full citizenship.
Well,
And-
you mentioned last night that they had a list of complaints.
They did.
You know, it's kind of like good news, bad news. Like if you say something's wrong, then you try to fix it, right? So they said they had no right of property.
Correct. They weren't allowed to own property. If they earned wages, they weren't allowed to keep the money. In the case of a divorce, the husband also often got the children. Women weren't allowed to go to college. Women were not allowed to be active publicly in a church setting. And in New England at that time, the church was also the government. All the official meetings of government happened in the church. So that's very significant that they weren't allowed to act publicly in a church setting.
Well, back in those days, didn't they have different sections of the church for the women and for the men?
Yeah, they did.
And maybe the women could be back doing sewing circle or something
Sure.
like that. But as far as actually getting to hear the sermon or the lecture in the main sanctuary, that was not allowed.
Well, they couldn't speak.
Oh,
They could be there and listen.
Okay. They couldn't participate publicly. So almost like
Correct.
silent worship. They were
Right.
allowed to do silent worship.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And so because, and a husband had the right to administer chastisement.
And what did they mean by that?
That means abuse. It was legal
For
for a
him
man
to
to
beat-
physically abuse a wife.
To beat her, if
To
necessary.
beat her if necessary, and also to restrain her liberty,
And what did that mean?
to keep her from leaving the property or leaving the house, keep her in her room, whatever,
No food, starve her if he wanted.
if he wanted.
Wow.
He had the complete power. She really was a non-person once she was married.
Wow. We've come a long way.
So this whole effort, the Declaration of Sentiments in Seneca Falls, New York in 1848, that was Susan B. Anthony's leadership there, but there were about 400 women who went there for that meeting and signed on to it. And Frederick Douglass was also there. Frederick Douglass was a black runaway slave who fought very hard for women's suffrage and for anti-slavery. And Susan B. Anthony was an anti-slavery advocate as well.
So she helped him.
She helped him.
Was he educated and
No,
no? Okay.
no. but he was a speaker.
Okay.
He was on a speaking circuit throughout the northeast part of the country.
So he was smart but not educated.
Correct.
And Susan B. Anthony was smart and educated.
Yes.
She had the privilege of having somebody instruct her and learned and
Yes.
became, quite well versed
Right.
on a variety of different subjects as far as legislation and laws and government and that
Right.
kind of thing.
Yeah, she was a little more sophisticated. She really started a marketing phenomenon for 1848 with the color scheme. The women wore sashes that were made from purple, white, and gold. Purple for loyalty, white for purity, and the gold represented the sunflowers that were the symbol of the Seneca Falls Convention.
Beautiful.
And that's a symbol of hope. The sunflower is a symbol of hope. So that started.
And the white would be the symbol of purity,
Purity.
perhaps. And then
Right.
the purple, would that be passion or
loyalty.
loyalty, of course, loyalty.
Yeah.
And I also think, well, you're kind of wearing a purple color today.
There you
kind
go.
Kind of royalty,
That's
too.
right.
It's a royal color to me.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah. So she learned something about how to pull the levers of power, they believed that protesting was just the beginning.
Well, that's part of our history. I mean, that's how we got anything done, I think, was by protesting King George and what happened, by saying we have rights and we have privileges and no taxation without representation. And
Exactly.
all
They used those same arguments against the white men who had used them originally against the tyranny of England.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they used the same arguments.
They didn't think they were listening, but they really were.
Well, they were not only listening, but they were learning, and they weren't considered intelligent. The men really didn't think that they had the intellectual capacity to learn, and so they were open around the women, thinking that they weren't learning anything. In fact, they were.
Of course they were. They were. I mean, they were paying attention. Maybe their opinion wasn't being asked, or maybe, but whatever. We know
Right.
that they paid attention because
Yeah.
it mattered to them. And the more something matters to you, the more you pay attention to it.
Right.
And if you hear other people are having that big experience, then it mushrooms, I think, and it builds.
Yeah.
So it started out with 400 women and men.
And men.
Okay, and this is Seneca Falls, which is kind of a remote area.
It is. There's a nice museum there now, dedicated to Susan B. Anthony.
Nice.
The Susan B. Anthony Museum. And so she was also very strong about anti-slavery. And unfortunately, 1848 wasn't that long before the Civil War started, when slavery became the main topic of conversation in the country. And so she agreed to put suffrage on the back burner and help the black slaves get their freedom.
Did she regret that later? Was she happy about that decision?
She was very angry afterwards because she had put her needs aside. And then she felt that they didn't keep their part of the bargain.
Oh.
Because when the 15th Amendment came along and gave voting rights to the black men, the women weren't included.
Right. So
She
that
thought that they'd pull the women along.
right, but they didn't.
But they didn't.
Well, they just wanted to struggle through to get through themselves, I'm sure. But by the same token, that was still really difficult for them because even though they had the
Yes.
right to vote, it wasn't easy for them.
It wasn't an actual permission because the literacy rules and the poll taxes and intimidation and downright violence. There were about 5,000 lynchings in the South, and they weren't all about voting, but a lot of them were. And so you really did take a risk by trying to go vote in the South. So even though they constitutionally had the right to do it, the U.S. government did nothing to protect that right.
Okay. So we have a good number of people, black men only, who are able to vote but can't because perhaps they hadn't learned to read very difficult things
Yeah.
sometimes. It wasn't just like they had to pass an easy literacy test, but
Correct.
the stakes were really high.
Yeah.
And it wasn't safe for them, and they had a lot of difficulty doing it. So, and what was the poll tax? What was that? You had to pay.
You had to pay to vote.
But white people weren't expected.
Well, they may have been,
Oh, okay, okay.
but they were able to afford it.
Oh, there you go.
Right.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So we find out that it didn't pass, and then Susan B. Anthony is motivated at this time, and she's thinking that we need to do something, but it's not till the 19th Amendment.
Right. She didn't live long enough to see it. But she did vote in 1872.
And that's a good story, like right there. I love the story about her voting. Tell me about that.
And the people at the polling booth allowed her in to come in and vote.
Was she dressed as a man? How did she do that?
Oh, no, she just came in, but they didn't argue with her. They were probably her hometown people, and they knew her. They weren't going to mess with her.
Well, she was a force to be reckoned with.
I'm sure she was. And maybe they even had sympathy for her.
Sure.
But she was arrested for that.
And she voted. It was a presidential election. It was Ulysses S. Grant.
1872.
And it was Grant
Oh,
against...
I don't know. I didn't write that down. I'm not sure who she voted for.
Oh, well, yeah, it's secret. It's private.
It is private.
So and we're not supposed to know that, but we could probably guess.
We probably could. But when she went to trial, the jury was all white men. Women weren't allowed to be on juries until 1937. So she complained that she couldn't have a jury of her peers.
And what did they say about that?
Well, the judge had it in for her.
Oh.
And he instructed, before the trial started, he instructed the jury to find her guilty. And then she went into a very prolonged speech. I think if you typed it out, it would probably be 10 or 12 pages long. And she stood there and delivered this entire speech defending why she thought she had the right to vote. And he found her guilty and fined her $100, which is a lot of money
Back then.
in those days. She didn't pay it, but he didn't send her to jail. President Trump last month pardoned her, but her museum association declined the pardon because they say she never admitted that she committed a crime and she never paid the fine, so there's nothing to pardon. So that was kind of an interesting thing that at this time he decided that he would do some support of women's rights.
So there's Harry Burns that you mentioned last night from Tennessee, and I like the story that you told about him. He was a young 25-year-old, was he a senator?
State senator.
From Tennessee, and he gave the deciding vote. Can you tell me that story? I really liked that.
Yeah. Well, you know, in order to have an amendment to the Constitution ratified, you need to have,
Majority.
at that time, 37 states to sign on. And they had the 36, and they needed Tennessee. And all the other southern states had already turned it down. So the suffragists were not excited about having to lobby in Tennessee in August. It was very hot.
Tennessee gets hot.
And it's a big state to travel around. So they had suffragists and anti-suffragists swarming the state of Tennessee by train, by horseback, on foot, going to the homes of all the elected officials, trying to lobby them.
Of course.
And they would keep changing their mind. They'll say yes to this one, and then they'll say yes to that one, and you never really knew who was on your side. So finally, they started giving roses, red roses to anti-suffragists and yellow roses to pro-suffragists.
Okay, so if you were supportive, you wore a yellow rose. And then what did Harry Burns do?
Right.
Did he wear...
Well, they finally got to the vote in the state house. And when it came to him, he was the last one to vote, and the tally was tied. And he received a message from his mother that he opened, and it said, "Robert, be a good boy and help Mrs. Cat Catherine Catt was a suffragist, and ratify this amendment. So he voted aye.
Yes.
And shocked everyone in the House because they all thought he was going to vote nay. But when he was asked if he had received a bribe to
vote that
way, he said no, that a mother always gives her boy good advice, and he agreed completely with his mother.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's a great story. I
Yeah.
love that. I
Yeah.
love that. So what was his story after he continued? Did he continue to have, we don't know, like if he had success in his career as a legislator, or
that's a topic for another conversation. I lost track of him, and maybe he is someone we should follow more closely to see how that goes. I'd like to know more about his mother as well.
No kidding. She's the kind of mother that I think we should use as a role model. But you're a lovely mother, wonderful mother, two amazing young, not so young sons anymore, with beautiful grandchildren. So Catherine Catt founded the League of Women Voters. I love her name, by the way, Catherine Catt. It's almost like Cat.
Yep.
And she wanted to do this. What was her purpose, her initial purpose?
Well, she wanted to make sure that women were educated about their voting, so that she wanted them to know who the candidates were. She wanted them to know how to vote. She wanted them to know what the issues were so that they could vote properly. And she wanted to bring forward legislation that affected things that women cared about.
Okay, so the League of Women Voters is current and active, and it's 100 years old?
100 years old this year.
Wow. Well, happy birthday.
Thank you.
Yeah, but I'm finding this so important to me right now, and I find that a lot of voters don't really know who's running, what the position is, what their positions are.
Right. So they can go to Vote 411.
Vote 411. Do you have something that you can put in front of you? Make it so everyone can see.
This is a QR code.
Vote 411, like you do 411 on your phone if you want information.
No.
It doesn't happen anymore.
This is a website.
Okay,
411.org.
So just Google vote411.org.
Yep.
And what happens when you do that?
Okay. Well, right now it'll tell you, put in your name, date of birth, and your address, and it will tell you whether you are currently registered to vote.
Okay.
And if you're not, you can go to your registrar of voters and vote, or you can go online right here and you can register to vote right here.
You can register right with this 411.
Yes.
Vote 411. Nice.
Yes, you can vote right online, and you can do it all on your cell phone.
Vote right here, or just register right here?
You can register.
Register right here.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you get registered.
So you get registered, and it'll tell you if they've received your absentee ballot. So once you're registered to vote in this state, you will receive an application for an absentee ballot.
Okay.
And those are, if you're already registered, those are being mailed out this week. So watch your mail this week.
Okay.
Between September 8th and 11th. They're leaving Hartford.
Oh, I thought it was going to be October. It's been moved up. September 8th through 11th?
This is the application for the ballot.
Okay, got it.
So you apply for an absentee ballot, and you can return that application either to your mailbox,
Okay.
and it'll go through U.S.
US
mail,
Postal.
or you can bring it to the drop box at Town Hall.
Which is right in front on Pennsylvania Avenue.
Correct.
Right, facing the street. I thought it was kind of hidden when I went to drop a ballot off.
I agree. I agree. And then you will get in the mail a real ballot. And once you get the real ballot, read the directions very, very carefully.
You have to sign it.
Sign it the way that you signed it when you registered to vote, because your signatures have to match.
Okay.
And then you have to seal it inside a second envelope. And then you bring it to that drop box, or you put it in the U.S. mail. If you're going to use U.S. mail, make sure you give them at least 7 days, because all the votes will be counted on Election Day.
Okay.
So it has to arrive on Election Day.
Not postmarked, but
Not
actually.
postmarked.
Okay.
Only votes, everything that's in on Election Day will be counted.
Okay.
If it comes in a couple days later, it won't be counted.
And the mail has gotten slower, right?
I would, if you can, bring it to the drop box.
Okay.
That's much safer. You can also bring it right into Town Hall and give it to the
Registrar.
or the registrar of voters at the community center.
Okay.
You can give it right to the town clerk.
And the other thing I heard is that I could not take my neighbor's ballot and drop it off for them, that you have to do it. Like, you have to live in that house and be in that person's nucleus to deliver that to the ballot box.
You can deliver ballots for up to 3 other people, but you have to sign that you are the bearer
Okay,
on the outside envelope.
okay.
But you can only do for 3.
Otherwise, that would be voter fraud.
They don't want one person picking up for 20 people at the nursing home and changing them all,
Right.
and then sending them in. So there is a limit
Of course.
to that.
And of course, we're
Yeah.
trying to make it as safe and as accessible as possible.
Right.
Because people don't want to go into the polling booths because of
Right.
COVID.
That's right.
And there are more cases of COVID, so we have to be very, very careful. I think
Yes.
vigilant almost.
Yes. So if you sent in your ballot, and then you changed your mind about who you wanted to vote for, if you show up at the polling place on election day before 8 in the morning, you can change your vote. You can
Okay.
get your vote back.
Well, that's interesting.
Because they won't start counting those ballots until 8 o'clock in the morning
Okay,
on election day.
okay. We just have a couple of minutes left, Joanne. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you would like for people to know? I just think it's so important to vote.
Right.
When I've worked the polls previously, and sometimes voter turnout is 40%.
Yeah.
That means 60% of the
Right.
population, our citizens who can vote, don't vote.
Right.
What's your opinion of that?
Well, obviously, I think voting is very, very important. And when you vote, then you can influence the people who you voted for. And we need poll workers, I would say. Working at the polls, you have to be 16 years old. And this year, we don't have enough older folks to work the polls because they don't want to be around COVID.
But they wear masks, and they wore the shields, and they had sanitizer.
It's very safe. Everyone gets their own pen that they take home with them. You're not sharing a pen.
Mm-hmm.
There's markers on the floor every 6 feet. But we need poll workers. It pays $250.
It's not bad, and it is a long day. You have to be
Yes.
there at 5 or 6 in the morning, and you're there. It's like a 12-hour
Yeah.
day, so it is a fair amount of work. But it's a good thing to be able to do.
Honestly, voting is the stress test of a democracy.
Absolutely.
And I think if you can get young people in there to work the polls, they'll see how it's done, and they'll be our leaders in the future.
We need that. We need more leaders, and we need people who want peace and justice and humanity. I think.
Yes.
People
Yes.
who care about other people and who have
Democracy.
democracy. There you go, Joanne.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, we're wrapping up now, so thank you so much,
Okay.
Jan, for being on my show.
Thank
and
you for having me.
Oh my gosh, my pleasure. Anytime, come again.
Okay.